Hello, my name is Chard deNiord. I'm the Poet Laureate of Vermont. I'm happy to introduce Bianca Stone to you today. She's my guest this month on Poets Speak. Bianca is a poet and visual artist. She is the author of the poetry collection Someone Else's Wedding Vows, Tin House and Octopus Books in 2014. Poetry comics from the Book of Hours, published by Pleiades Books in 2016, and multiple chapbooks. She has a new book coming out in February titled The Mobius Strip Club of Grief, also published by Tin House and Octopus Books. She's also a contributing artist for the special edition of Anne Carson's Antigonic. With her husband, the poet Ben Peace, Stone has co-edits a small poetry press, Monk Books, and with Peace is the executive director of the Ruth Stone Foundation, an organization dedicated to the furthering of poetry and the arts and the preserving of Ruth Stone's legacy and house in Vermont. So thank you for being here, Bianca.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here. I thought we would start by just hearing a poem of your choice from either of these two books that you've published, one that you're about to publish.
Sure, I'll start with one from Someone Else's Wedding Vows. It's an elegy poem in a way, so it fits in with my new book as well. Reading a science article on the airplane to JFK. Today I flew over the Midwest, filling out a questionnaire on the emotional life of the brain and personal capacity for resilience against despair. I was making a sculpture of my limbic systems and a huge conceptual neurosis. Under the simulated middle-class environment of the fuselage, the snow was falling. And in everyone's skulls, complex regimes went on and on and on. I seek forever the right way to know this, that there are bridges not built in me, that there are areas that do not light up. You are at a party having a conversation with an interesting stranger. You are in a restaurant and the service is bad. You have experienced profound grief. How do you react to this? Down on the ground, your family writhes. Down on the ground, you are surrounded at Starbucks, the terrible glow, and you've seen someone you love with the colossal, complex vehemence die. And it is pinned under glass in perfect condition. It is wrapped around you like old fur. You've looked at the sky until your eyes touch zodiacal fantasies right there in the void. You know this, that the body lays down while the mind bloats on intellectual chaos. And you've just eaten a bag of cinnamon-flavored chips and assessed that if you met a wonderful new person who ran from you in horror, you would fill their space with calculated desolation. Thus you are waking up having traveled through time. You are looking down at the Statue of Liberty, garden gnome with her arm in the air, her head full of strangers, and you hear crickets lined up, playing their creepy violins. And you want to be good, and you want to be liked, and you want to recover.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Let's go back to your childhood, if we could, for a minute. You grew up in Goshen, Vermont, and you spent a lot of time living there with your grandmother, Ruth Stone, who was the Poet Laureate of Vermont for 4 years, from I think 2007 to 2011. Mm-hmm. And of course, just a national treasure as a poet. And she used to read to you all the time, and
she did.
Influenced you in a profound way.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with Grandma in Goshen and trucking around the country to her different teaching gigs and readings. And like my mother, who's a novelist, she was very vehement about us writing and drawing and creating, and creativity was like way up here and everything else was like way down here. Math, spelling, school, socialization, money, it was like all down here, and it was just like poetry and art was like way up here. And And so I was lucky enough to understand the importance of poetry from a really early age. I think all children love poetry inherently, but I understood a certain amount of importance as a profession in poetry. So, so I always knew I wanted to be a poet.
Well, now that you've become a poet,
Yeah.
and a very celebrated poet, especially at such a young age, looking back, do you think about her influence in any way, or just her presence, and maybe how it's affected your own work?
Of course, I think that, well, I know that her poetry is completely ingrained in me because the family was constantly spouting it, and she was always, reading new poems to her daughters and to me, and so I have her music in my head, and I think that a lot of my poems respond in a way to her poems. So I have that influence, but I've really taken it to make it my own, respond to it from my own voice. And so I feel like it's a really healthy passing on of a certain tone and subject and voice and influence that I'm so grateful for.
Well, it's amazing that you write with such remarkable confidence and authority in your own work, and don't seem to feel that burden of the mantle, that she's passed on to you. She was such a huge figure in the world of contemporary poetry, and yet you're finding your own way with just remarkable originality. So maybe I shouldn't ask you about that because it would be a little difficult to become too self-conscious about.
I mean, you can't be somebody else, so you kind of have I've had my own experiences and trajectory in poetry outside of Grandma since I left home and went to college, and that was really important for me. Like, I had to leave home and experience being really humble and humiliated in poetry workshops and learning about other poets' voices that I hadn't experienced before, and finding my own path. And I think because of my own just curiosity in different areas and my own journey, that I've made my own.
So that must have been educational, certainly in its own way, as far as the career of a poet.
Well, there's an incredibly rich and thriving poetry world
in Brooklyn, especially
in New York City, and I was so lucky to have, and am lucky to have, amazing poets as friends. Just creating lots of different things. Like, yes, I created Monk Books, but it's so puny compared to something like Birds LLC, which my friends started in Brooklyn and elsewhere in the country. But they're all starting small presses and reading series, and it's just amazing how much power you can have now as a young writer, and how much access there is to getting it out there. I adore New York City, absolutely became my home, and I needed that experience to make me the person I am today, meet my husband, develop my poetry, just be part of something really magical in the writing world. And it always will be a home to me. My sister still lives there with her children, and my best friends live there. It will always be a second home to me.
So that,
if anybody will hire me at NYU, I mean.
Well, that might happen.
No, I'm just kidding.
But that raises the questions of why you moved back to Vermont.
I knew that to do the Ruth Stone Foundation, which we started after my grandmother passed away in 2011, we really needed to be there on the property in Goshen, Vermont. And it was a real leap of faith. I was pregnant, about to have a baby, and decided to quit our jobs and move to Vermont with no jobs yet,
Very bold move.
It was really, really scary and really, really hard. And at first was, felt like a mistake because, I was just in such shock. And now I just wouldn't change it for the world. Sometimes your life that seems to be great and cushy and everything you want is actually holding you back from so much potential that you have. And I feel like moving to Vermont and focusing 100% on the Ruth Stone Foundation, on my own artwork, on my own writing, and Ben as well, my husband, and my baby.
Who we're going to meet maybe here in
maybe,
a few
hopefully
minutes.
she'll make a grand appearance. Has just been incredible. In 1 year, I feel like have grown so much, and the foundation has grown so much, and we've been having a really, really fun time getting to know the Vermont poetry scene as well, which, when I left, I was 18, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you describe the house a little bit? The Ruth Stone Foundation is in the process of trying to fix up Ruth's house, which fell into disrepair. But a place that she wanted to turn into a writer's retreat. In fact, that was her dying wish, that the Ruth Stone Foundation.
Yes, on her deathbed, she said, make a writer's retreat.
And so you've worked diligently to do this and boldly to move up here without jobs. You live in Middlebury during the winter and up behind the house in the summer.
Now we live in an RV behind the house because the house is not quite livable right now. It was always a ramshackle farmhouse and always needed a lot of work and has been sort of patched up ever since she bought it in the 50s. And we have raised a lot of money through crowdsourcing and private donors and to fix it up and make it into a really intimate writer's retreat and just artist space, a place for readings and public events. We have lots of really fun ideas about community-based programming and also having people from outside come and stay and learn. Almost an alternative to an MFA or post-MFA learning. But the house needs so much work, so much infrastructural work, and Ben, my husband Ben, who's also a poet, is learning carpentry so that we can do a lot of it by hand, and we've been doing as much as we can by hand, and also diligently going through my family's relics and my grandma's papers, and just doing all that work that one does when somebody passes away, especially when they're kind of a hoarder and kind of a poet and an antique collector. It's like there's just a lot to go through. It's been a lot of sorting and a lot of carpentry and a lot of plumbing and gardening and help working on the landscape. And so we have a long way to go, but we've also come a really long way, and the house is looking really good.
Yeah, you're getting there, and I think we can actually provide a picture of the house later on. So we can insert that here. But you've been remarkably busy with your poetry too. You've written a new book, as I mentioned in the introduction, which is the Mobius Club.
It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful.
It's the Mobius Strip
the
Club
Mobius Strip Club of
Grief. And
yeah.
I was wondering, you have a wonderful poem in this new book about making applesauce with your grandmother, your dead grandmother. And that might give, I think, some folks an idea of both your grief and the nature of your grandmother's influence on you and her legacy.
Yeah, I'm happy to read it.
Okay.
Ruth is buried on the property, so that's really special and unique. And also, she wrote a lot about this apple tree that was in her backyard and still thrives there. And so this is a poem I wrote called Making Applesauce with My Dead Grandmother. I dig her up and plop her down in a wicker chair. She's going to make applesauce and I'm going to get drunk. She's cutting worms out of the small green apples from the backyard, and I'm opening up a bottle. It erects like a tower in the city of my mouth. The way she makes applesauce, it has ragged strips of skin and spreads thickly over toast. It's infamous. Eating it is as close to God as I'm going to get, but I don't tell her. There's a dish towel wrapped around her head to keep her jaw from falling slack. Everything hurts, but I don't tell her that either. I have to stand at the call box and see what words I can squeeze in. I'm getting worried. If I dig her up and put her down in the wicker chair, I'd better be ready for the rest of the family to make a fuss about it. I'd better bring her back right. The whole house smells of cinnamon and dust. We don't speak. She's piling the worms, half alive, up in a silver bowl. She's throwing them back into the ground, right where her body should be.
Thank you. Yeah, could you talk just a little bit about the provenance of that poem, how it came to be?
Well, I think just the theme of this discussion is just carrying on a certain torch that's a little complicated. I think just, family-wise and this responsibility of taking over her house and her estate and wanting to do it justice, having my own feelings about her as a granddaughter, also just sort of mourning the body itself, I think in this poem comes out a lot. And I feel like now reading it, I see a sort of metaphor of the apple as the body and the worms as coming back. The worms that eat the apples will go back to eat the body that's buried in the yard and things like that. I don't know, just this whole
cycle.
Cycle. So the book explores a lot of the complications with grief, family, body, mind, soul, in losing somebody that's like a giant figure in your family.
Sure. This poem sparked, I think, a lot of the other poems in your new book, as far as the grief poems, what you're calling the Mobius strip club of grief. And, but before you talk a little bit more about how that might have happened, because it just seemed to take off, you wrote this new book very quickly, I thought we might meet Odette. And just to show the audience the new generation, the new Stone.
Is she here?
And let's just see if she's here. Let's see Odette. There she is.
You gonna read a poem?
Can you say something, Odette? Can you say a few words for us? Okay.
So it's been really fun having a baby in Goshen. And
she's such a good baby.
Yeah.
And she's been living in the trailer with you behind the house. And I say trailer, but it's really it's
a caravan.
Yeah.
We're a little gypsy family.
Yeah. And she seems very happy there.
Yeah. She's been wonderful. It's been really amazing. I was scared, having a baby. I didn't know what it would mean for my writing life. And we've really, granted, she's a very, very good zen baby.
She looks it. Yeah.
I've really already. I've been, writing and drawing still, and letting her watch me and interacting together with it, and it's been going good.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, Liz.
Okay.
Could you talk a little bit about how these new poems started and then continued to come?
Yes, you say that it happened quickly, but I don't know if it did. It's been a long time brewing, and I think what poets find is that when they do finally experience a loss, that they're really grateful to have poetry as a place to express their grief and also to read, to comfort. And I found I was writing a lot of elegies after I lost my grandma, who I was, again, very close with. She was like a mother to me. And I started going back to her poetry as well. And she wrote a lot about grief, having lost her husband so young. And she also wrote about her mother and her sister and her, who died at a very young age, relatively. And I was so struck by the solidarity I felt in reading those poems, and that they had never resonated like it did with me now, that I did have someone I loved very much who was gone. And then reading her poems, it struck me that there was this continuity in grief, and that it was shared and passed down. And it started to expand from there in my mind, this idea of inherited grief. Because I think that she felt, in a way, her identity was wrapped up in her loss of her husband and his suicide. And therefore, my mother and my aunts, it became wrapped up in their identity as well. And it was a very intense drama that they still, to this day, define themselves by. And I say that's a little maybe extreme, but of course there's many other things that they define themselves by too. But I think that it in a larger way, that happens with even whole countries, even whole people, peoples. It's like we can, and I think it even happens on like a molecular level. Like I think like it's, it can be passed down in the genes, this sort of grief, this mourning, this terrible trauma. That's what trauma, I think, can be very much given over to the next generation. So a lot of this book is kind of meditating on the mythologies that families create around trauma. And the title comes from a Ruth Stone poem called The Mobius Strip of Grief. Much easier to say than mine.
I like the club in there too.
And so her poem is, the title is exactly saying that a Mobius strip is basically an infinity symbol, more mathematical than that, but it goes on and on and on and never ends. And just the pun that happened in my head, the Mobius strip club of grief, was funny at first, and I wrote that poem, but I couldn't let it go. I kept writing it and writing it to kind of, and it turned into this sort of purgatory of Dante-esque proportions, and bled out into ideas of feminism too, because I started thinking about strippers and, punters, and like what happens in strip clubs, and the exhibition of grief, and the the body itself, the naked body in death and the naked living body. So all these things started to bleed in and became much, much bigger than a girl mourning her grandmother. It became much, much bigger, about family, about humans, about death, about life. So I like that this book, I let myself go a bit in what it meant to write an elegy, and what was acceptable in a book of poetry and what wasn't. And I think that while a lot of these poems speak to each other throughout the book, they are also all standalone poems. So I think it plays with the idea of an epic poem too, slightly. Thematic narrative poem, but it's very lyrical and fragmented too. So I had a lot of surprises writing this book, and it took a lot of effort to say, all right, I've got to sit down and finish this book, put these pieces all together, and so it was both very long and very quick.
It's just a fascinating book, as you say, for its kind of epic reach, and the sort of the continuation of the the theme of grief that of course, your grandmother wrote so profoundly about after Walter, her husband's death in 1958. But there's another amazing element in your grandmother's work as well as your work, which is humor.
Yeah, thank God for humor.
You're able somehow to combine humor with the grief in a way that makes it so palatable.
Well, I think like my title too, like that it's a Mobius strip club of grief. Like you have to counteract the drama somehow, because I think even tragedy, if you can't find some sort of way to deal with it, then it can consume you completely, and you get, what so many poets come up against, which is suicide, And so, I don't know. I mean, I think Grandma had a great wry sense of humor, and I love that about her work, and revisiting it, I laugh out loud reading her poems. And
I think everybody does.
Yeah. I think she also could be so deadly serious and beautiful. Wow. And even people now, like a lot of young poets, like they want to be funny, they go to a reading and they really want to make the audience laugh, and it's like there's like a self-consciousness about being serious. And I think she was so good at balancing her humor and her seriousness in her poetry.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Like no other contemporary poet that I can think of, actually.
That's very kind.
Yeah. Let's conclude maybe with just another poem from your new manuscript that maybe gets at some of the things you've just been talking about.
Well, I'll read the title poem.
Okay.
It's okay. I'll just read it.
All right.
At the Mobius strip club of grief, come on in, the ladies are XXX. If you want the skinny ones, we've got skeletons cracking round those poles. And over at the bar, there she is, with her breasts hanging to her stomach, gorgeous with a shook Manhattan and murderous with a maxi pad. At the Mobius strip club of grief, all the drinks are free. Grocery store rosé in gallon bottles on every table, and the dead don't want your tips. They just want you to listen to their poems. Don't do anything potentially dangerous, and call every once in a while. In fact, they tip you at the Mobius strip club of grief with checks. With a sigh, they'll throw one down at your feet. We make it rain with checks. Then the dead are sitting down in the back of the club, dying further, sniffing, shuffling into the bathrooms, holding their skin in their hands, farting methane and sobbing across the stage with their last meal. It's the raciest show in town. And ladies, there's men too, hanging themselves on the bathroom doors and from the rafters, totally naked, tears coming down their faces. Ladies, you'll love how their feet smell, how their bones protrude, how they leave no note.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you so much, Chard.
Such powerful work, and I really appreciate you being on Poet Speak, and hope you'll come back at some point.
My pleasure.